Alright, hello everyone, and here is the August tier list for Command & Conquer Rivals. This is obviously based upon my opinion, so yeah, it's not fact, it's just my opinion. I did discuss this tier list with a few high-ranked players, such as Nick Cool, Anas, Copycat, Alarak, and Striker. So this isn't just me thinking this, we did generally come to a consensus. So, mostly going to be talking about what's changed from the last tier list, which is on Scoundrel's YouTube channel. But yeah, we'll run through some units and we'll take a look, talk about a few of them. But first of all, let's talk about what the tiers mean. So S tier is God tier. This is like completely broken units that appear in basically every deck. Like if you're not playing this unit, you're probably wrong. That's S tier. A tier is a meta unit, so just a very good unit that will appear across multiple different decks. B tier is off meta unit or role player, so this is still good units. This is still meta units, but they're not the ones that appear frequently across multiple decks in the A tier ones. So just to be clear, role players includes things such as things that appear in a single deck. So like a Giga Cannon deck is normally based around the Giga Cannon. You can't just put a Giga Cannon in any deck. It wouldn't work. You have to actually build a deck around it. So that's why something like a Giga Cannon would be B instead of A. It's not necessarily based on power. It's based on the ability of the unit to appear in multiple different decks. So an A tier unit is something that you can just jam in any deck and it'll be pretty good most of the time. A B tier unit is something that's still good. It's still like as good as an A tier unit most of the time, but it's less flexible and it'll appear in less decks. C tier units are ones that are okay. You can play C tier units. They're fine, but I probably wouldn't recommend them. I think they're not really worth playing personally. D tier units are just rubbish in my opinion. Like I would never play a D tier unit. I think they're absolutely horrible. So yeah, don't play D tier units if you're going by my list. C tier units, they're okay. You can play those. Don't play D tier. Alright, so without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with the commanders. Alright, so here is the commander list. I've put a plus on anything that has gone up from the previous tier list on Scoundrel's channel, and a red arrow on things that have gone down. So we're going to talk mostly about the things that have changed. So S tier is still Seth. Seth is now the only S tier commander in my opinion. Liang is SA. He's really good. He's probably the best GDI commander at the moment, but he doesn't automatically go in every deck. Like, you do have to be playing decks where Liang makes sense for him to work, which is why he doesn't quite make it to S, but he is probably the best GDI commander right now, so that's why he's in between the two. Strong Arm is down to A, mostly just because Liang is so good now. Liang is the better choice, meaning Strong Arm gets pushed down. Oksana's down from SA to A because Oksana really is just about powering up specific units. Oksana doesn't really work as well as Seth in the aggro decks anymore. It used to be that you could play Oksana or Seth in your aggro deck. Now you just should probably be playing Seth, and you only play Oksana in specific decks. Jackson's down to B. This is because Liang and Strong Arm are just both better options. Jackson just isn't that good anymore. The main reason for this is that he's been nerfed with his two key units, which is the Orca Bomber and the MLRS. The MLRS no longer gets a reload speed from Jackson, or like gets a reduced reload speed, which was the main reason to boost it, and the Borka doesn't drop bombs faster when boosted, which was again the main reason to boost. So those decks are now weaker because of the fact that Jackson is no longer as good with them. Also, MSV has kind of replaced Jackson as an option. Like, you can play an MSV deck and then MSV as your Jackson boost, and then you just want to be playing Liang every time with that deck. So Solomon has moved up to B tier. The reason for that is the Fortress deck. The Fortress deck is popular and MGs are popular, and Solomon is extremely strong against them, and that's why Solomon is in B tier. I don't actually think Solomon's very good. I don't like Solomon very much at all, but in this current metagame where we're seeing quite a lot of the Fortress style things and MGs, Solomon is an excellent choice against those, so he is up to B tier. But he's more of a C tier, really. It's just the current Fortress metagame that allows him to push up a little bit. Kane's still sitting in D tier. The buff didn't help. He's just terrible. Don't play Kane. It's just awful. It's an absolutely terrible commander. Alright. let's get to the units. So let's start with Nod. So here we have Nod. This is the Nod tier list currently. The only Nod S tier unit I believe at the moment is attack bikes. These have moved up from A tier from last video. It's just very difficult to play a deck without attack bikes. The reason for this is that a lot of the cheap aircraft have moved up in power as well. Like the Venom, the Talon, the Banshee, these things are all better than they were. They've all received buffs, and so you really need a cheap answer to them in your deck. It's really hard to make a good Nod deck without bikes at the moment. They're in basically every deck, which is why they become S tier. The lasers are down to A tier. This is purely because scavengers exist. You don't have to play lasers anymore because you can play scavengers. So scavengers, lasers don't have to go in every deck. Lasers or scavengers probably have to go in every deck, but you can choose one or the other. So lasers are down to A tier. Scavengers have come in at B tier. The reason for this is that I think lasers are still the slightly better option. Scavengers only work in some decks, whereas lasers, any deck that has scavengers could play lasers. The same is not true the other way around. Not all decks with lasers could replace them with scavengers, whereas all decks with scavengers could replace them with lasers, and it would work fine. So laser is A, scavenger is B. Wheels are down. Obviously, wheels have received multiple nerfs since the last tier list. They used to be absolutely disgusting. Now they're just good. There's a very, very good unit, but they're no longer completely broken. You don't have to play them. Chem Buggy has moved up to A. This one might be a little controversial. I think Chem Buggy is disgusting. Such a strong unit. Recently got a vehicle damage nerf, which hurts it a tiny bit, but yeah, I think this unit's really strong. I've been seeing it a lot more in less dedicated decks. Just random decks have a Chem Buggy, and it's still really strong. So yeah, I think this guy's really strong. It just kills basically all cheap infantry very effectively. It's not so good against things like Mutant Marauder and Grenadier, but with Micro you can still kill those things. And the fact that it just cleans up all the cheap infantry so fast, and even the tier 2, like Shocks and Flames, go down so quickly. I think this thing fully deserves the A tier. Scorpion's down to A tier from S. The reason for this is there's just so many more options now. You can play so many different decks that don't require Scorpion, so Scorpion just isn't S tier anymore. We've got so many other options. Giga is viable, Mutant Marauder is viable. There are air decks now that are much more viable. Artillery is much more viable. All of these things mean that Scorpion is no longer the meta-defining unit that it once was. Venom received a buff. Venom's now up to A tier. Venom is now an acceptable replacement for Wheels. During the previous tier list, you basically had to play Wheels. You couldn't play Venom. It just wasn't good enough. Now you can play Venom or Wheels. Either are fine. Very good unit. Flamers are down. Flamers are down just because Venom's up, basically. It's not as exciting to play Flamers now that we've got there's so many more air units flying around, like Venoms and Talons. So yeah, Flamers are down from A tier. But they're still good. Like I said at the start of the video, B tier and A tier are similar in power level. It's just about how many different decks they go into. And I think that Militants are just so strong right now that it wouldn't make sense to have Flamers and Militants in the same tier, because Militants are just better. Marauders are also down. This is as a symptom of tanks being down. Tanks are no longer the main thing that everyone is doing, so a counter to tanks is no longer as important. So they're no longer the A tier unit they once were, but they are still very good. Stealth Tank is also down. Stealth Tank actually would have been way down, except that it recently got buffed back up. It got a huge nerf. It was last time we had it in A tier, and it was amazing. It was super broken. They got massive nerfed. It would have been like a C or a D tier unit. Then it got buffed again, so it's got the old stats, but now it costs 100, so it's back into B tier. It's an acceptable unit. You don't have to play a Stealth Tank though, but yeah, it's a good role player. Laser Drones up to B, not because they got buffed, just because Pitbull got nerfed. The biggest problem with Laser Drones was always just that Pitbull made them look embarrassing. Now they can actually fight Pitbull a little bit better, now that Pitbull has to engage them for a significant amount of time to get shots off. So yeah, Laser Drones never needed a buff, they just needed Pitbull to get nerfed, so they're up to B tier now. They're like a good unit you can play. Let's take a look what else we got. Artillery is still in B tier. Just quickly talk about this. This probably should have been A tier in the last video, but no one hadn't been buffed long enough for everyone to realize this. It's since then been nerfed, and now I think it sits in B tier. The artillery is still very strong, but it only really works in one deck, which is the artillery deck. So yeah, it doesn't get to be A tier because you can't just slot artillery into any deck. It really needs a specialized deck around it. C tier is all the same as before, except for Flame Tank now costs 90. It's a huge buff. This thing is now like an acceptable unit. You can actually play Flame Tank. There's a few people on ladder playing Flame Tank. At 90 cost, like the thing, it has a lot of hit points. It kills infantry very quickly. It kills a base very quickly. That's the main thing you do with it. It's totally playable now at 90. And Rockworm is up to C tier. So Rockworm, I actually think is pretty good now. I've been really impressed by it. I've been using it a lot. The reason it's in C tier is that it doesn't block. Like when it moves, it has to go underground, so you can't block units from getting onto pads. It doesn't contest pads while it's underground. Obviously, it would be overpowered if it did, but that means that to move, you need to stop contesting, which is really awkward. And it's still in the tech lab, which is not great. Like being in the tech lab is still not exciting. But the actual unit performs very well now. It two-shots laser squads because it does AoE damage now. I think the unit is actually very strong. It's just the mechanics of the unit are quite poor, which make it very difficult to use effectively. Cyborgs and Avatar sitting in C tier. Avatar, sadly, doesn't get to be B tier. It's close. It's very close to B tier, but the Mammoth tank is just the superior option. I don't think the Avatar deck is as good as the artillery deck. So Avatar is borderline B, but currently sitting in C. And Basilisk is in D. So Basilisk is basically just down because Avatar is down. Avatar used to be a much better deck. Basilisk was a good counter to it. Avatar isn't so good anymore, so there's not a lot of reason to play Basilisk. Yeah, not super impressed with the Basilisk right now. So that's down to D tier. Alright, let's move on to GDI. So here is GDI. GDI actually has no S tier units at this point, in my opinion. The closest unit GDI has to S tier is the Slingshot, because the Slingshot is absolutely gross. That thing is so powerful, but it's because it only does one thing. It only fights air, and it does nothing else. You can't, like, it's not always going to be a great build. You know, you're not always happy when you build a Slingshot. You shouldn't always put them in every deck. You can make decks that don't have Slingshot and they're still good. You can play things like Pitbull and Talon and Hammerhead as alternate options to the Slingshot. So Slingshot doesn't make it to S tier just because there are other units you can play in that slot, and it's fine. But it is very close. This thing is very, very strong. In combination with things like the Fortress deck or MGs, it can be very oppressive, especially with MG. MG Slingshot is a very cheap combination that can kill basically everything in the game. So yeah, no S tier units for GDI, but Slingshot is the closest. And I've already talked about Slingshot. It's moved up to A tier, obviously. Like, the thing is very strong. The only thing holding it down before was that Pitbull was so good that there was no real reason to play Slingshot when you could just play Pitbull. But Pitbull got a bit of a nerf. Pitbull's down to A tier now. Due to its nerf, it now has other viable options. Previously, you should just play Pitbull. There was no reason to play the other units. But now Pitbull is has viable alternatives, so it's down to A tier. Still a very good unit. I mean, it's just, you can still put it in almost any deck and it'll be good. But it's no longer an auto-include because you have things like Slingshot as an option. Dogs are up to A tier. I think dogs are really good at the moment. They're very cheap. They work well in a bunch of different combination decks. They go well with MGs. They go well with snipers. They're just a really good opening unit. The small damage buff they received made them a lot better at taking down things like shocks and flames in a reasonable time frame. So yeah, I think dogs are really strong right now. So they're really good. Riflemen are pretty close to S tier as well, but they're not quite there. So rifles are in A. So Talon is now up to A tier. Since the Drone Swarm nerf, Talon is pretty much just like almost a better option almost every time. It depends on your deck again. If you need a dedicated anti-infantry, the Drone Swarm does still kill infantry faster. But the versatility of Talon is amazing. It's so cheap. It beats Banshees effectively on cost. And also fights infantry well. It's just a very versatile and cheap unit. Very strong. Mohawk is also up to A tier. Mohawks receive some buffs. It doesn't die to one volley of a Phantom. And most importantly, the Stealth Tank got nerfed. And Stealth Tank was the main reason that Mohawk was struggling. Mohawk had a bad time when Stealth Tank was very popular, but Stealth Tank is no longer anywhere near as popular. So Mohawk is up to A tier. Very strong unit. Very good. Like Mohawk a lot. MG is up to B tier. The popularity of Slingshot has made the MG a lot stronger. The biggest weakness of MGs was air, and Slingshot just annihilates air. Like, Pitbull's had a hard time killing the air unit before the air unit whittled down the MG. Slingshot doesn't have that problem. Slingshot and MG combo is really oppressive, so they're up to B tier. Jump jets are down to B tier. This is just because there's so many other options and the game is less tank based. It's less about killing vehicles than it used to be. So a specialized anti-vehicle unit is not as strong as it was. Shocks are down to B for the same reason as flames. It's just rifles are just better a lot of the time right now. And then we've got MSV, MSV, Shatterer, and MLRS all in B tier. Shatterer and MLRS obviously are... Shatterer and MSV are new. That's why they don't have pluses or minuses. It's first time appearing in tier list. MLRS is up from D, where it was unplayable. It's now pretty good. Received a lot of buffs and has the MSV deck that it goes in. The Shatterer is up here just because of this deck. The Shatterer just received a speed nerf, which made it a lot worse. But this deck is quite powerful. This sort of fortress style deck. So yeah, they are all in B together, basically, because of that one deck. Predator is down to B tier, same reason that Scorpion's down from S. Tanks just don't rule the world anymore, so Predator is not as good. Predator is good, though. It is very good, but it's not as good as it was. You don't just put it in every deck. In fact, I would say I don't see Predator that often. Most decks don't seem to play Predator right now. There's a lot of MLRS instead, and a lot of air decks. GDI is mostly air-based at the moment, so yeah, a lot less Predators running around. APC is down. This is because the metagame just doesn't work as well for it anymore. It's a beefy unit that you want holding your front line, and there just isn't as much going on that it's good against. Yeah, it's just the APC deck is just not as good as it was, and APC itself is not as good. But it's still a good unit. It's still solid. Just doesn't really fit into... It only really fits into like one deck. So yeah, it's down a bit. Drone Swarm was down from S. Drone Swarm was really, really strong. It was like the best unit in GDI pretty much. Got a movement speed nerf. It's a lot worse now. Now it is probably just worse than a Talon most of the time. You only play Drone Swarm when you want the really heavy hitting anti-infantry. Because it is a lot less powerful than it was. It doesn't contest as well because it's so much slower. It doesn't get into position as quickly. You can't create 2-on-1s as well as you used to be able to. Yeah, Drone Swarm took a big hit with that movement speed nerf, but it was broken, so that's a reasonable nerf. Borker is also down. This is largely the Jackson nerf. It also got a pretty big hit point nerf, but those two things combined have made Borker a lot worse. Borker used to be just like you could answer like all tech with it, with the boost. It could sweep everything up and then survive on like 40% hit points or more after killing everything. That's just not the case anymore. It dies now. Like, it doesn't tank a pad for long enough. Still a great unit, no longer completely broken like it was. So yeah, it's in B. Mammoth is up to B. The Mammoth deck, I believe, is just better than the Avatar deck. I think, the Avatar deck is better, but the Mammoth is better than the Avatar. So I prefer the Mammoth style, simply because that win con really does win you the game. So yeah, the Mammoth tank deck is pretty good, so Mammoth is up in B tier. The only tech unit that for GDI that makes it to B. Snipers are down to C. This is largely just because air. A lot of people are playing air decks right now. There's a lot more Venoms. A Venom can suicide itself at a sniper, and still you come out ahead. Even if the Venom dies, you normally kill like 1 or 2 sniper models, so you're pretty happy. So yeah, that's the main reason snipers are down. They're just not that well positioned right now. Hammerhead is also down. This is because Slingshot and Pitbull are just better. I mean, before it was like you had Pitbull and then Slingshot or Hammerhead were your other options. Now I think it's insane to really play Hammerheads over Pitbull Sling. So yeah, not a big fan of Hammerheads at the moment. I think they're okay, but not great. So they're in C. Wolverine is up to C. This is just because of the Wolverine Sandstorm deck. That is not completely horrible. Like, there are, like, most GDI tech decks do need to use Wolverine to bridge the gap. Usually those decks are Wolverine Sandstorm Zone Trooper, or Wolverine Sandstorm, or Wolverine Zone Trooper. So yeah, Wolverine's up to C just because of those decks, but I'm not a huge fan of the unit still. Disruptor's down to D tier. I've just never seen anyone playing Disruptor. It doesn't really do anything. There's a lot more air around, so yeah, Disruptor is not really where you want to be. And Titan and Juggernaut are also sitting in D. I think these guys just suck. I think they're like the worst tech units. Juggernaut is absolutely horrible to try and use. It's so slow. It's nowhere near as oppressive as artillery. And Titan is just, I mean, Titan takes like 4 minutes to kill a dog squadron or a wheel squadron. It's just embarrassing. Even a bike squadron it struggles with. Like, that beam just, it's very hard to get value out of the 2 range. Titan's only job really is like a fortress buster or to counter avatars, neither of which are really that useful. So yeah, Titan down in D, as it always will and always will be probably. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the tier list. Obviously this is not factual, it's opinion based. I did canvass the opinions of a few high ranked players though. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you next time.